Thank you very much, Sama. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. It's terrible weather, but here are some good news from WIPO. In addition to Sama and Carsten, we have Masaid Khan, who is in charge of our statistics under Carsten. So look, what we are talking about today is the three systems that WIPO runs, which make it easier to get protection in more than one country for inventions, for brands, and for designs. So they are, of course, the Patent Cooperation Treaty for patents, the Madrid System for international trademarks, and the Hague System for international designs. Most attention is focused on the Patent Cooperation Treaty because it's technology, and it is a very good indicator of the relative strengths in the fields of technology of the various countries of the world and what is happening in those areas. The story is somewhat similar to that we've seen in previous years, and I suppose again, I would emphasise two persistent trends that we experience in these systems, and particularly in the Patent Cooperation Treaty: rates of growth that surpass that of the global economy. So we see this once again confirmed, and with that, I must say that these systems are used by all the major corporations in the world. And so it is a service provided by a UN agency, which is a state-of-the-art service and which concerns a field which is moving extremely quickly and which is at the centre of the world economy, namely innovation, whether the innovation is in the functionality of inventions, or in the marketing through brands, or in the external appearance of products through designs. The second persistent trend is the rapid rise of China and more generally that of Asia compared to, let's say, Europe and the United States of America. So now looking at the details very quickly, because you have, I think, all of these details, but the Patent Cooperation Treaty grew by 4.5% in 2017. The growth was driven mainly by China and Japan. China overtook Japan as the second largest user of the PCT system, or the second largest filer of international patent applications. So that's very significant. We saw China overtake Germany to become the third largest about 5 years ago, and now we see China overtake Japan to become the second largest. There were overall 243,000 international patent applications filed. So this, I think we can say, even though it's not able to be substantiated, but these are the best new technology that is emerging, represent the best new technology that's emerging in the world now, because it's technology in respect of which global protection or international protection is sought. Now, of those 243,000, just to give you indications of the numbers that breaks down into, the United States retains number one position with around, I'm giving you round figures, but you can get the exact figures from either my colleagues or they're on the materials, 56,000. Then comes China, 48,000. Then comes Japan, also 48,000, but China is 48,800, Japan 48,200. Then you go to Germany in fourth position with 18,000. So the numbers are quite, there's quite significant differences in the numbers. Then you go to the Republic of Korea with 15,000. So The performance of the United States, of course, is still outstanding and number one, but China and Japan, 56,000 compared to 48,000, that's not a huge difference, especially since this is a dynamic field and we see the numbers change every year. China has, as you are well aware from what we've been saying now for a long time, experienced growth rates of international patent applications that have been higher than 10% for every year since 2003. So this is quite, 14, 15 years now. Let's pause for Switzerland, which is a high performer. So Switzerland filed, or Swiss enterprises and Swiss nationals filed 4,491 international patent applications, and that was a growth rate of 2.8%. So when you consider the size of the population, the size of the country, Switzerland is a high performer in the innovation field, and as you know, it has topped for several years our Global Innovation Index. Of the 15 top filers, China and India are the only two middle-income countries to feature. India is rising, but we're talking about 1,600 applications, so it's a completely different order from 48,000. So much then for the Patent Cooperation Treaty, but happy to go into more details. Well, look, perhaps I should mention that the top individual filers, and they are Huawei, first of all, followed by ZTE, so both Chinese corporations are number one and number two filers, and they're followed by Intel, Mitsubishi Electric, and Qualcomm. Now, interestingly, you cannot fail to notice the fields of technology. They're all IT-related companies. Let's move to say a few words then about branding and international trademark applications. So there we saw growth of 5% in international trademark applications in 2017, with an overall number of applications of 56,200 filed. And again, strong growth from China. Now, when we come to the Madrid system, the PCT system, I think, is a very mature system in terms of its geographical coverage. 152 countries. It covers all of the G20 except for Argentina. It covers, 98% roughly of GDP, global economic output. In the case of the Madrid system, it's not quite as comprehensive. So it's 100 contracting parties covering 117 countries. So it's not quite as extensive. And in addition, some countries have joined rather recently, let's say in the last 20 years, and that includes the United States. And so it's not quite the full reflection that you get from the Patent Cooperation Treaty. Nevertheless, it's a very good indicator. So strong growth from China in the Madrid system, as well as in the Patent Cooperation Treaty. And that's very significant, of course, because if you just go back anecdotally, in the last decades, 40 years or so, we did see Japan, coming with a whole range of extremely successful global brands. And you've all could name at least 5 of them, I imagine. So what we are now seeing also is China coming through with global brands as well as global technology. Also from the growth of China, by the way, I didn't give you the figure, it was 36.3% in international trademark filings. Interestingly, the second highest growth rate came from the Russian Federation with 23.9%. In terms of individual filers, then from in the Madrid system, international trademark applications, the top filer was L'Oréal of France, followed by a Hungarian generic pharmaceutical company. Generic pharmaceutical company, Richter Gideon, followed by Garzenmann, ADP Garzenmann of Germany, followed by Novartis, and then Abercrombie and Fitch. And of the top 15 applicants, 12 came from Europe, 2 from Asia, and 1 from the United States of America. And then a quick word about the Hague System for designs, and that again is a much, much less comprehensive picture that we get of design activity worldwide, because there are only 53 now countries party or contracting parties to the latest legal framework for the Hague System on industrial designs. Nevertheless, we see that overall there was not as many international applications filed as in the preceding year, but in the case of designs, an application can cover more than one design. And there were actually more designs filed last year. The number of designs went up by 3.8%. What can I tell you else about designs? Well, the top filing country is Germany, followed by Switzerland, the Republic of Korea, United States, and France. Remembering the Republic of Korea and the United States are both recent joiners of this system. They've only been in the system 2-3 years. The top filer individually was Samsung Electronics of Korea, followed by LG Electronics of Korea. And they were followed by the Netherlands, Fonkel Meubelmarketing, Procter & Gamble, and Volkswagen. And I suppose the last point I would make is simply that it's interesting that the top 2 filers for designs, international designs, are both IT companies again. And design is something that we have traditionally associated with areas where the technological possibilities have been exhausted. For example, footwear or furniture, where design, then the external appearance, becomes the chief means of product differentiation. And here we see filings in designs now, important number of filings in high-tech areas, which is an illustration of the degree of competition that exists in those areas, and where every means of differentiation is appreciated and used. So that's all I have to say. Carsten, you have anything to add?
Thank you. Maybe just one remark on the top applicants list under the Patent Cooperation Treaty. So among the top 50 top applicants, we have 28 companies from East Asia. And that underlines what the Director General has pointed out, that there clearly has been a shift towards East Asia. So when I mean East Asia here, this is China, the Republic of Korea, and Japan. 10 applicants from China. That has also grown over the years. That includes, of course, Huawei and ZTE technologies that we've long reported on. They have for a long time featured in the top 50 list of the PCT. It also includes companies such as Alibaba, BOE, that I think are by now household names. But it also includes a few companies that I think are household names in China, but not yet necessarily household names outside of China. And that, I think, just goes to show how rapidly the innovation landscape in China is transforming. we have 13 applicants from the United States and 9 from Europe. So, this is another way of looking at what is happening under the PCT. I think the nice thing with the top 50 applicants list is that it gives us a concrete idea of who are the companies behind the PCT. Of course, a lot, as the Director General has pointed out, in digital communications, information technology, electronics more generally, but you also see some other consumer products feature in that list. Let me leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Christine, Tom, Laurent, Catherine.
Yes,
Please.
I have Christiane Oehre, German press agency. I have 2 questions. One, just to understand, it's all about China, but when you look at the list of the biggest
Filers, is it?
filers,
Yes.
the Chinese companies are not there. Does that mean that there are not so many?
No, I don't think that's correct.
I mean, on
On Madrid or
the Hague list, there's one Chinese company among
okay.
50, and
Okay.
on the other one there might be 10, but not in the first
Okay, so
20, right?
so look,
Does that mean there are
no, I think that the explanation is quite simple. China's not a member of the Hague System. So, if they have filed some applications under the Hague System, it's by using a subsidiary that is established in a member country of the Hague System. So, it's not a member of the Hague System, but as a matter of fact, if you look at worldwide IP filings, so what we are dealing with here is the international systems, where you file one application is good for 152, 117 or 53 countries. But if you look at the statistics that we published at the end of last year on what's happening all around the world, each individual office, national applications, China files 50% of design applications in the world. 50 nationally. Yeah, so if you total all the design applications all around the world, China is filing 50% of those. So they're big in design, but they haven't yet joined the international system. We are hoping that this might take place this year, and then we'll see, we have a more representative sample to report on in terms of the international system. Yeah.
So, sorry, I'm trying to work out how representative is this? If it's all about China, but then China doesn't figure because they are not.
Yeah, well, look, I think that's not correct about patents. So the patent system is quite extensive. No, PCT.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so it's very extensive. It's 152 countries. Slightly more than 60% of all patent applications that are filed in more than one country pass via this route. Pass via this route.
How many?
More than 60%, slightly more than 60% of all patent applications that are filed in more than one country filed via this route. So if you're going to file in, let's say, 20 countries, more likely than not you're using this system. So this is a good representative sample covering roughly 98% of the world GDP of what's happening in the field of new technology on which commercial rights are claimed, property rights are claimed. Now, Madrid is slightly less comprehensive. It's 117 countries. And The Hague is much less comprehensive. It's 53 countries. See?
And what would be the other route for someone to file an international?
You file
you
file 152 national applications.
But there's no other system where you can file in more than one country other than the...
Well, apart from regional systems, like the European system.
Right.
But more than 75% of the applications that are filed in the European Patent Office pass through the PCT first. To the European office through the PCT.
So it's still 40% that don't go through the system.
Yeah, but look...
Go through a regional system then?
No, they would go through... Look, first, why do you file patent protection? You're filing it because you don't want imitation and you want to have the competitive advantage that is conferred by your new technology protected against predatory practices, right? Now, if the capacity to make whatever the technology is exists in only 3 countries, you would file in only 3, wouldn't you? Because you're not going to have a competitor in more than that. And that's the case for certain fields of technology, how many competitors are there in large commercial airline technology? For example, there's Boeing, Airbus, and so there are it's a complex world, technology, but this is as good a picture that you get of new technology, and I don't think that what you said about Chinese companies is correct. About if you look at the Patent Cooperation Treaty, they're all over it.
Tom?
The first 2 filers, for example. Sorry.
Tom Miles from Reuters News Agency. Donald Trump reportedly is about to announce massive tariff retaliation against China for stealing US intellectual property. China denies that it's done this. Do you have a view on who's right or wrong, and do you have any concerns about China's acquisition of intellectual property in the last 20 years?
So, first, no, I don't have any view because we're still at the stage of speculation. And so I'm unable to say what it is that is happening or proposed to happen and on what grounds. So we don't have the benefit of any evidence that would be used in order to take whatever action it might be that might be taken. So that's for the first. Now, then dealing with China over the last 20 years, which is what the second question you pose. Well, I think one cannot but notice that there has been a remarkable transformation in the Chinese economy, and that China has gone from a position of being largely a consumer of technologies to a producer of technologies. As a producer of and I think this is statistically borne out, as a producer of technologies, it is a new competitor, or a relatively new competitor, in the world of competition based on technology, which is at the centre of, actually, economic competition now. And what we have seen is, I think, an extremely strategic approach adopted by China, which is coming from the top of the leadership of China, an emphasis on innovation by President Xi Jinping and by Prime Minister Li Keqiang and the rest of the state leadership, and a number of careful policies put in place in order to develop the technological capacity of China, covering fields such as artificial intelligence, advanced manufacturing, and so on. So this, I think, is the reality of what we've seen in the course of the last 20 years, and the reality is that a new competitor has arrived. And it's a very strong competitor, as the figures would show. That's the situation. Now, the positions that individual countries may take in relation to that are for them to decide, and not for us. And we will just observe what occurs now, but I would say that the commercial, economic and geopolitical reality that we must take cognizance of is that China has arrived as a major technological competitor.
Just to follow up though,
Yeah.
I mean, has it done that by playing by the rules? I mean, either explicitly stealing technology or strong-arming companies into handing over technology in order to gain position? And also, just to pick up on the first part of your answer, you said we don't have the benefit of any evidence. Do you mean by that you haven't yet seen the US complaint, so you can't comment on it, or are you referring to
I haven't seen what the US is going to do.
Is that what
Yes.
you meant by
Yes, that's
okay.
right. Yeah.
So, but what about whether or not China is playing by the rules in terms of how it's acquired the IP that it's...
Look, I think it's a very big question. You know, when you talk about the whole technological capacity of a country, it's a huge question. You're talking about a very complex innovation ecosystem comprising regulatory framework, institutions, individual actors across a vast country. And so I don't think one could take a judgment on that question even without an extremely careful analysis of a minutiae of, a huge amount of detail and evidence. So we have, I think, we hear a lot of anecdotes, but the substantiated basis of assessing this in relation to any country is a major, major question.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
Does WIPO have a role in that assessment? I mean, do you have are you totally agnostic on the question, or are you simply compiling are you monitoring whether or not countries may be stealing IP?
So, no, we don't do that because we have a range of action which is determined by our member states. And what our member states have done in the 120 years of existence of the organisation is establish a certain legal framework which is contained in about 26 multilateral treaties, which establish a number of rules, but this is by no means comprehensive of all the possibilities, first of all. And secondly, it's established a number of systems, which we're talking about this morning, where you can get international protection, but we have no jurisdiction for monitoring compliance or non-compliance. That rests with countries individually to take up on a bilateral or plurilateral basis. There's no multilateral mechanism for that in WIPO.
WTO?
WTO has a dispute resolution mechanism which covers the TRIPS agreement, and so intellectual property complaints have been and I imagine will continue to be brought in relation to that.
If I can just ask on a different subject,
sure.
I'm Jamie, I should have
Sure.
If you could just sort of take a step back and look at the rise in a number of patent applications. What is the long-term sort of payoff for that? I mean, does it translate into greater trade, greater market share? I mean, how can you get from point A to point B so that people can just look at is this a precursor essentially of China's future economic posture and
yes, and I think it is, absolutely, and I don't think there's any secret about that. I mean, the articulated, expressed strategy of the Chinese leadership is to go from made in China to created in China. So, if you like, in very simplistic terms, to go from being the factory of the world to the laboratory of the world. And that's a strategy, and each country has its strategy, and I think that's not unlike the strategy of a number of other countries. And some other countries might already say, well, they are already the laboratory of the world, and that's where they want to stay. So I think the indications have been very clear on the part of the Chinese leadership as to their ambitions in establishing the technological capacity and excellence of China. Yeah.
And by your reckoning, then, I mean, their policy is one thing, but the figures that you show that they're well on their way towards that.
We can't fail to notice that. So, some people will say, well, these are numbers and we don't know about the quantity behind them. And that's a perfectly correct statement for not just China, but every country. Their numbers, no reason to single out China. Every country is in the same position of us not having a metric to judge it. And as I think I've said before, if you think about it, you know, if we had a metric, you wouldn't need a venture capital industry.
Right.
We'd all know what to, you know, to follow. So, and technologies are, you know, thus a highly difficult and complex game. But these numbers are significant,
And so,
to say the least.
last point on that.
Yeah.
President Trump has obviously expressed some concerns about competition from China generally. Based on your numbers, you'd say he has good reason to be concerned.
I would not want to comment on what Mr. Trump has said, but I would say, as I think I said earlier, that China has arrived as a major competitor in the field of technology.
Can I maybe make a
Please.
point that is slightly
With
less, how should I say, maybe it's my perspective as an economist. I don't think, in some sense, it's all about confrontation here. In a sense that, you know, yes, China has, I think, dramatically increased its innovative capacity. And I think that clearly means, you know, there's lots of change happening in the global economy, and I think that clearly also, you know, sort of puts the more traditional locations of innovation under pressure, and certainly that accelerates structural change. But, you know, the Chinese market is also a big opportunity. It's the fastest growing market in the world, and more generally, you know, I tend to think of technology as a global public good. In a sense, you know, a solution to a technological problem that's found in China, you know, can be applied all around the world. So I think while the rise of China does mean disruption, I think there's definitely an upside to that for everyone. And I think probably as economists, we have difficulties getting heard in, you know, sort of that kind of, or making that type of case, but I think it's something important to keep.
I think that's great. Can I just add to just one thing to what Carsten said? I think it's wonderful what Carsten said. He's absolutely right. I think the other point is that the rise of China does not necessarily mean the decline of the others.
Yes.
It means there's a new competitor on the scene, you know, and you know, we require a longer term to be able to assess.
Right, but if history is any guide, I think some of the discussion you have these days on China, you had 30 years ago on Japan.
Yeah.
And, you know, if there's any evidence or any lesson drawn from that, it's not that the other countries have lost out.
Yeah. Tom?
Sorry, I just want to pick up on what you said. I'm sorry, I know there are other questions, but you said it's a global public good. Surely the whole point about intellectual property is you have the right to get paid if somebody takes your idea and uses it. And, you know, China,
Yes.
in nuclear power, for example, I mean, I seem to remember the Chinese built 3 generations of reactors. They started off by inviting others in. Second time, they built it with other technology. Third time, it was, you can go home, now we've got your technology. You know, they are taking the technology and using it and not paying necessarily. You know, I mean, that's not fair in the eyes of foreign companies. So how can you say it's a global public good? Somebody needs to be paid for this. That's the point.
Well, and that's precisely the idea of the patent system, you know, that you create a reward to invention, but, you know, patents expire after 20 years. You know, airplanes were invented in the United States. You know, the Brazilians claim that they also have a contribution to that effect. But airplanes these days fly all over the world, and, you know, the benefits of airplane innovation, you know, has not been confined to the United States. Clearly, you need to have the patent system, you know, to incentivize innovation, and as you said, to make sure that companies that invest in innovation, you know, see a reward in doing so. But that doesn't diminish the fact that, you know, once something is invented that's of use to society, it's of use to society all over the world.
Laurent, Swiss News Agency, then Catherine.
Do you have any broad idea on how many applications related to autonomous cars have been either filed or granted? And in that case, I was wondering, is there a way for member states, if the technology is revealed to be either dangerous or not fully controlled, is there a way for them to ask for the patent to be cancelled? And what would be the process?
So, first, that information is obtainable, namely, but you have to, and here is another function of the patent system that goes back to the discussion that just took place between Carsten and Tom, but that is, it's an extraordinary source of economic intelligence. Extraordinary source, because you can see what the latest, movements are, who's patenting and in what fields. But of course, you have to do patent analytics to do that. So it's easy. Your information is not difficult to obtain, but it does require a little bit of work. And we have a patent database with 70 million documents in it that you can, search quite easily, actually, for this. So that's number one. Number two, we will publish later this year, I think in November if I'm not mistaken, but in the last part of this year, a new report on global tech trends. And this will cover, this time, artificial intelligence related technology and inventions. And the autonomous car will certainly feature in this. And then there was a third element to your question, which was
Dangerous.
dangerous. No. So the patent system is a limited instrument of public policy that covers that has the objective, as Carsten has already mentioned, of creating an incentive structure for the investment in new technology. There are different regulatory instruments to deal with technology or behaviour that is deemed injurious or potentially harmful to the population, and that covers everything from pesticides through to some of the new stuff that we're seeing coming on now.
Yeah. So there is no way, now generally speaking, there is no way for a member state to request that the patent might be cancelled for different reasons.
No, but you see, there is often, depending on the field, there is the patent that you obtain, which is not a license to do anything. It's a license to stop others from doing something, actually. And in many areas, such as agricultural, chemicals and pesticides or pharmaceuticals, you need to go through a separate regulatory approval to obtain permission to be able to market. But that's not us, that's, different regulatory mechanism.
Catherine?
And just a final comment, at least the patent system shows you what's out there, So one of the other elements of the patent system is to create transparency about new technology, and so at least you can find out through it what the new things are that are in respect to which rights are claimed, provided that people use it, but there is a widespread use of the system.
Catherine?
Catherine says from IP Watch. On your document here, on the annex, I see that you've got a 2017 estimate for the PCT International Application by Origin. Are those definite numbers or just estimates?
They're pretty definite, but not completely definite, because most applications are filed first in the national office and transmitted to us. Even though it's an international application, it's filed first, the filing place. So, we will see some applications filter in over the next months that are not yet in the figures and which will cause minor adjustments, very minor adjustments.
So my question, in fact, was about how the developing countries are faring in the IP system. The BRICS country, except from China and sometimes Russia, and India is getting there, but Brazil is absolutely nowhere in this block. It's not fighting very much. And South Africa is not faring very well either. And in Africa, Latin America, very few countries are fighting. TRIPS has been there for a number of years, but it doesn't seem to be encouraging or facilitating the access to innovation by developing countries. So do you have any idea on this? And the growth in international application that is steadily observed in WIPO? How does this reflect, what consequences is this growth on the WIPO budget?
Okay, so quite a bit. So I'll start, Carsten will follow. Look, I think that one of the things that is clear, and even without looking at these figures, is that the acquisition of technological capacity is a long-term game. It's not something you can get overnight. You know, you can't go into a shop and suddenly purchase the whole deal or even steal the whole lot. You know, it's a long-term game, and that is shown through in our figures, and it also underlines the exceptional character of the rise of China in a short period of time, because it has done it, and we see that it's a lot for other countries to do it. Now, that's the first comment. The second is that there is movement, but it's smaller movement. So we're seeing that filings from Turkey, Brazil, South Africa, Thailand, and Morocco, there's small numbers compared to the big filers, all increased. You know, Turkey 16%, and it's getting up to filing what countries like Belgium and some other European countries are filing. So these are, I think, this is interesting, but it's a long-term game. But Carsten, maybe you've got... And on the budget, yes, well, the PCT is 71% of the revenue of WIPO. So we are very delighted that there's a lot of interest in new technology.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I mean, certainly to agree with you that having the best intellectual property laws in place is not a sufficient condition for innovation to take off. I think especially the difference between Latin America and, let's say, East Asia really reflects fundamental structural differences between these economies. Still think it's in some sense an unresolved question. How come that East Asia managed to do that and Latin America didn't? And I think we could spend the next hours coming up with hypotheses, and there are lots of opinions around that. But I think it's a much broader question. It goes beyond matters of IP protection.
Chinois.
The question is about the quality of the application, the PCT qualifications worldwide, especially in China, and the transformations from the PCT to the real production situation.
So on first one, we had a little exchange on that already, and so we don't actually have a metric that can tell you this is a good application, this is a good invention, it's been patented here, But there are certain features of the thing which would suggest that, of the environment, which would suggest that what's coming through the PCT system is the best part of the technology. But this is, it's anecdotal. Why? Because you wouldn't go to the trouble of filing in a multiplicity of countries unless you think you've got something, But of course, one can always be mistaken. But that's one reason alone. Now, quality is much discussed in academic and policy circles. There's a lot of discussion that goes on about, how to actually measure quality, but we don't have a simple answer. We've got a number of indicators. For example, the process that's followed by a patent office. For example, the number of times courts in a country are overturning patents. There are a number of indicators, but but we don't have a simple way of looking at this, and I think it's a very complex phenomenon. There was a second part of you?
Trust with some details from the transformations from the PCT patent to the real products.
Yeah, well, that's a very complex process, of course, because you have an invention and you want to commercialise it. And there are a lot of things that need to happen for that to be successful, including, getting your financing in place so that you can actually transform it into a practical, innovation. Your branding, consumer preferences, what the nature of the technology is, whether people are interested in social trends in relation to technology. So it's a hugely complex process that takes place. Yeah.
Maybe if I can add one thing to that. Answering that question is very difficult, not only in China but elsewhere. And in many cases, it's very difficult to establish a direct link between patents and products that are later on introduced. The one area where you sometimes observe this, and that's an interesting one, is when it comes to standard setting in the case of telecommunications. There are these so-called standard essential technologies that are often patented. And if one sees, for example, the evolution from 3G to 4G technologies, one sees much greater participation of Chinese companies, including the Chinese companies that you would see under the PCT, in these standard setting pools, and that of course, includes the patents on 4.3 technologies, that have been filed by those companies. And anecdotally, if one sort of looks at the next generation of 5G digital communication technologies, there are lots of patents being filed out of China. So I think that will be one interesting field to observe. To what extent will future technological standards evolve, at least partly around Chinese patents, for which then also the Chinese companies receive royalties. So that's sort of one that's maybe still at the anecdotal level. It's a small window, that you have in at least seeing some commercialization.
Peter?
Peter Kenny from the Independent Newspaper Group in South Africa. South Africa, like Brazil, we're quite far down the league table, but they have filed a number of PCT applications, and I see that 3 of them are actually made by South African universities, and there is one, Stellenbosch University, it says sugarcane next to it. Are you able to say anything about the type of applications that South Africa has been making? Because I see that also they have been making some in the field of civil engineering.
Yeah. As a generalisation, I can't say it, but again, you could go and pull out easily pull out all the South African applications and look at their various technological fields. So it's an exercise that is a little bit time consuming, but not too time consuming. But I can't tell you that off the top of my head. Yeah.
Any more questions? Laurent.
Back to that discrepancy between the estimates and the definitive figures. So there is no way Japan could be, after the final numbers, could be second? Or
Look, nothing is impossible in this world, but it's highly improbable. Yeah.
No, that won't be the case. I think this will be very small as
Yeah.
So dozens of cases.
That might remain the same.
No, and I think that's the reason we hold this press conference in March. Our friend Summer already bugs us in January and say, can't we come out earlier with this? And we say, well, listen, we have to wait until we are, with a high degree of confidence, I don't want to say certain, but, we have great confidence that the numbers are accurate. And I would say we are at 98, 99%. So by all likelihood, we wouldn't expect Japan to still take over China.
Well, thank you very
Great.
much.